I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we are meeting. Tonight, what can science learn from the success of the Matildas? And is Australia doing enough to compete in the space race? It's National Science Week, and tonight I'm joined by a panel of big thinkers. Astronaut Meganne Christian, the first Australian woman to be selected for the European Space Agency. She's here as part of Sydney's Science Festival. University of Sydney Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott, the former Managing Director of the ABC. Australia's Chief Scientist, Cathy Foley, a physicist who spent over 36 years working at the CSIRO. Matt's Geek, Adam Spencer, who is also a best-selling author and comedian, and award-winning journalist and author Angela Saini, who's in Australia for an event at Canberra Writers' Festival and the Wheelers Centre. And if you had the choice, would you want to live forever? Welcome to Q&A.
I'm Patricia Carvelis. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials, including, as of this week, on the ABC News Twitter account or X account, whatever you like to call it. Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Natalie Chapman.
Hi. It's been fantastic this week to see the Matildas' success and also the profile for women's sport being increased. How do we encourage the nation to be as proud and excited about our STEM successes as they are with our sporting success?
Meganne?
Yeah, it's a tough question because it's very easy to understand winning a sport, right? And people get behind a team when they're winning, but it's a little bit harder to understand when a scientist is winning. But there is a lot of great stuff happening, and I think fundamentally it's the same deal. There's so much grassroots stuff that's gone on behind it. The same with the Matildas. I mean, there was so much work that went on before they became this success recently, and it's the same thing. So you've got to get involved in museums, get involved in science programs, the same way that you should get involved in your local sports team.
Do we need a Science World Cup is the big question. Dr. Cathy Foley, I mean, it's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, it is, and it's really great to see that we're celebrating Science Week, which is fantastic and a great opportunity for us to focus on what science means. So sometimes we just have to have celebrations, being able to highlight the great stuff that we're doing, not just here, but globally. And also, I guess in the case of women, because the Matildas are a women's soccer team, is being able to make sure that we turn that into something which people can recognise, can see it as part of who they are, and hopefully encourage a whole lot of young women to think, I can be that. And getting out there, things like Science Week, having you have us here tonight is fantastic, so thank you for that. But it's a way of exposing, I guess, a broader audience to saying this is something which we need to celebrate, this is something that affects every one of us, and something which maybe an individual young girl, young boy might say, I can be a scientist too.
Adam, it seems that the Matildas have created a kind of magic. They put a little bit of magic sparkle dust over us all. How can science do that? Well, that sounds frightening, actually. I don't want science sparkle dust on me, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, just quickly on the Matildas, first of all, if you are one of the 4 million people who hopped on the Matildas bandwagon during the week, that's great. There's a lot of room on the bandwagon. But as someone who used to publicly advocate for that team back when people would ask, what's a Matilda? Can I just say to everyone who's hopped on board, in the next year, just go to a couple of W League games as well. Or just, if your young girl's a bit sporty, get her to kick a footy around and see how it goes. I just hope it's not this. These same girls in the lead up to the 2019 World Cup were playing in front of crowds of 2,000 people in warm-up games in Australia. What we've seen in the last month has been fantastic. It was Dylan Alcott, the former Australian of the Year, a disability advocate, said, it's the closest I've ever come to standing up. That's funny, but let's not let this moment just be lost. And then it's a matter of telling the stories, the things that Australians have done. In my field of mathematics, we've got not one, but 2 Australians who've won the Fields Medal, which is the Nobel Prize of Mathematics for career achievement under the age of 40. There's a mathematician at your university, Geordie Williamson, who's regularly in discussions of the best mathematicians in the world. The things that we do in that space are absolutely magic. We just need to be better at telling the story to the next generation of young, nerdy maths geeks who want to come along and be the next Geordie Williamson, be the next Terry Tao.
So, next time one of those maths geeks, Mark Scott, has one of those victories, do we need to have a public holiday for them, for instance? Is that the sort of time that a public holiday should be called?
Well, I think we've really got to celebrate, and I think we've got to tell the full story. You know, when I was working here at the ABC, I was told women's sport would never rate on television. Now it's the biggest team sport ever shown on Australian television.
Did you believe them when they told you that?
Well, probably. I mean, there was just not a lot of media coverage, and it was a self-fulfilling activity, wasn't it? But now clearly proven wrong. And I think it's the same about coverage of science. I think what's great about the Matildas is that we see and hear the backstory, we see the humanity. They seem to be very real people. It feeds our curiosity about them, and the excitement grows, and it grows across all genders, all age groups, all parts of society. It's very, very inclusive. So I think telling the full and complete story, including the story of how our great mathematicians and scientists got there, all the years of work before the moment of breakthrough and the moment of triumph, we've got to do a better job of telling that complete story, because I think it's an enchanting story and an engaging story, and one that clearly can find a big audience.
Now, Angela, we should be clear, we didn't call each other before the show to organise the Matildas kind of theme, although we're happy that it happened. Just reflecting on this incredible football story for women, but the lessons for science, do you see a link?
I do see a link. I mean, I remember when I was at high school, the girls did netball and the boys did soccer or football, because I grew up in the UK, and we just took that as given. As arbitrary as it seems now from 2023, we just thought that was normal. And I think the wonderful thing about women's football now is that it is a reminder that, of course, as people, we can do anything. There shouldn't be those arbitrary distinctions between what women can do, or what girls can do and what boys can do. Everything should be open. So for me, this is much more than just about football. It is a reminder to us all that we can do everything. You know, everyone can do everything. And so, you know, I'm not a huge football fan, and, you know, I've become a soccer fan since arriving in Sydney on Saturday.
Picked a great time to get here, mate. Great time.
Best week to be here. But for me, this is everything. It's not just about soccer.
No, there is something kind of electric going on, isn't there? Everyone's completely lost their minds. Have you lost your mind?
Yeah, I have that. That was the tensest moment of my life, and I've been through astronaut selection. So.
Honestly, like...
It was amazing, just watching the penalty shootout. Is it going to end?
What is more stressful, going through astronaut selection, do you think, or being sort of, you know, the defence of Australia in front of those goals?
Oh, gosh. Well, I've never done that, so I wouldn't know, but that would have been extremely stressful.
Yeah, it looked pretty stressful. Just to clarify before we move on to our next question, are we all pro-public holiday if they win?
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah. Yeah,
Who doesn't love
Australian
public
not
holiday?
to be pro-public holiday if they win.
I don't care what the rest of the public are doing. I'm taking a week off when they win. You won't see me for 7 days.
And this gets us to the topic of our online poll. We're asking you, should Australia get a public holiday if the Matildas win the World Cup? No, we're not push polling. You can cast your votes anonymously on the Q&A Facebook and YouTube accounts, or on the ABC News Twitter and Instagram account, X account. We'll bring you the results a little later. And next, we're going to hear from Charlotte Berry.
A drought, a heat wave and a hurricane have created Hawaii's deadliest wildfires. The world keeps turning to scientists and higher institutions to fix climate change, yet no one seems to listen or act on these answers. In the spirit of storytelling, is the real crisis we're facing, in fact, a communication crisis?
I might start with you, Dr. Foley.
Well, first of all, it's really tragic, isn't it, seeing what's happened in Hawaii? And it's something which I think all of us in Australia really understand what that really means. And also, really, when last time we had major fires here, we actually knew what to do, and the number of deaths was more to do with accidental rather than actual a consequence of the fires themselves. And that's something we should be, in a weird way, proud about, because Australia's been doing research. First of all, the researchers that I'm used to in CSIRO, where I came from before I did this job, I had 70 years of research in that area. And of course, we've got our first Australians who have who've got 65,000 years of understanding how to go about doing coal burning and really understanding how to control fires and keep that under wraps to some extent. And we've got a lot to share with the world. But I think what you're saying is really important. How do we actually communicate this so that we're able to make sure we share it with other countries where we're seeing in Greece, the USA, Canada, even the UK has had its a few wildfires, they call them there. And one of the things we've been doing is sharing what has Australia learnt and being able to make sure that we're able to take the learnings we have, even though each country will be a bit different, and work on that. But you're saying, how do we actually turn around and address climate change? And because this is a consequence of it. And that's really requiring governments to make decisions. We're seeing that now. They've got a plan. Well, they're working on continuing to have plans. We've got a target. There's a realisation that we've got to do something fast. We've got to do an energy transition at a rate that we've never seen before. This is going to have a huge impact, not just on government making decisions, but every one of us is going to have to think about the way we live.
Dr. Foley, are we moving fast enough, though?
At the moment, the requirement is we need to be reducing by about 16 megatons of carbon a year. We're doing 2, so we need to increase by 8 times.
So the answer would be no? No,
we've got to up it.
The thing that struck me was, remember 3 years ago, those iconic images of the Harbour Bridge, you couldn't see it for the smoke. Yeah. And that shocked the world. Celeste Barber, the comedian, went and tries to raise some money for the Rural Fire Service. She raises $52 million from an assortment of Hollywood stars and everyday people and people on OnlyFans and all. She gets so much money she doesn't know what to do. The world was shocked. A few months ago, we saw those American cities that you couldn't see for the wildfire smoke, and you just sort of went, yeah, I guess so. What's happened in Hawaii is tragic, but no one's surprised. When you've just had the hottest day, a series of the hottest days, the hottest week and the hottest month ever measured, you can't pretend to be surprised by what's happening in Hawaii. And I don't know what else scientists could do to tell the story of, look here, people, look at the data, look at the graphs, look at the models, look at the mathematics, look at the projections. This is all going in one direction. We have to now get past a point of almost complacency where people just think this is almost inevitable now. If we really pull out some stops, we can take the worst part out of this, but the clock is genuinely ticking now.
That's an interesting point you make about complacency. Angela, have we reached that point of complacency? We're just used to it. You live in New York, those images.
Yeah, I was there when the sky went orange, and that was pretty scary. But as you say, we're so used to it. We see it on the news all the time, and then you're suddenly part of it, and it becomes a new normal. The problem is that we as societies are capable of coming together and achieving huge things if we need to. We saw that during the pandemic. You know, when states need to act very quickly, they can do that. The problem with climate change, of course, is because it's a long-term issue, it's not a short-term one. And the way that democracies work, obviously, is they're not thinking in those long-term ways. They're just thinking about, how can I make sure that I win the next election? I have to care about those people who want to keep using their cars, want to keep consuming so much more, who want their standard of living to go up. Those big decisions just aren't being made when they need to be made. And that, I'm afraid, could be the end of us. That inability to think, to act long term, I think, could be, what destroys us ultimately. And I hate to be pessimistic about it, but why are we not acting?
Again, are we?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to highlight the good science that is going on. to try and combat this. There's the technology side of things where, there are a lot of technologies that are coming up that can help fix this problem if we decide to do so. At the same time, we're doing a really good job of monitoring the planet. So there are satellites that are orbiting Earth at the moment that are monitoring all of the Earth's conditions. They're also helping us in the case of disasters. So when there are those bushfires, we see exactly where they start, where they're going, and we can help mitigate those disasters. So, the science and technology is there. The decisions and the policies and the regulations need to catch up, basically.
Mark Scott, how do you change that? It sounds to me that the only people missing on this panel very deliberately tonight are the politicians, and it seems that this might be on them.
Well, the reality of politicians is they want to get re-elected, and so they want to be seen to be doing the right thing by the will of the people and the engagement of the people. And politicians are the ultimate responsive animal in that respect. And so I think, in a way, it's turning the fear that people have when they watch the television news into a clear and coherent demand for action that pushes politicians into a time frame that goes beyond that immediate and that short term into the longer, more deliberative decision making that climate change demands. I think we're at a very interesting point now. As you think of what's happened in Hawaii, you think of what's happened in the United States, and you anticipate this Australian summer to come. Because, we've had so much rain, there's been so much growth, and now it's drying out very quickly. And you look at the heat that's been there in the Northern Hemisphere, it just feels terribly ominous. And again, I think there's a sense of, the sense that you can see and feel, disaster coming in many ways. Again, I think that puts an imperative on political leaders to look beyond the immediate and the short-term and pragmatic and engage more fully in the tough decision-making that climate change really demands.
Dr. Foley, just finally to you before we get to our next question. You gave us the numbers before and said we're not doing well enough. Is it time for a moratorium on coal and gas? Is that the point we're at?
At the moment, we've got lots of opportunities to make a big contribution. We're seeing critical minerals, which Australia's got lots of, as a pathway for us to be really able to contribute. So that's where a big focus is on being able to make them processed, available, make batteries and be able to do that. And if you go through looking at what the government's planning to do, it's something where they've got the need to get to zero emissions by 2050 and then 42% or 43% by 2030. That's going to require us to really double down, knuckle down, being able to deliver at the rate that we have to, knowing that we've got to have an overall plan. So it's, the government's the elected government of the day, and we have to make sure that we champion the options and make sure they're aware of where the opportunities are and make sure that we've got the best science to support the opportunities that are there.
With COVID, we followed the scientific advice pretty closely. Are we doing the same with climate change?
Well, at the moment, what I'm seeing is a whole lot of things happening in energy transition, plans to be able to get to the emission targets that we've got. We've got energy sector plans coming together in order to work out what does each sector have to do to deliver on that. So we're working our way through it.
But it's not fast enough, you're saying?
Well, we have to do it at the rate that we're not used to. It's hard to get your head around the scale. I think a previous chief scientist said that we've got to cover the area of Tasmania 5 times with solar panels if we're going to get, as an indicative amount, if we're going to get the amount of renewables in place. That's a lot of solar panels.
All right, our next question comes from Karadorf about Bonner.
Personally, I am worried that I may have a child that will grow up not being able to find any job because of employers' preference to use AI in the workforce. Does the panel think enough is being done to ensure that the growing population will not be out of job in the future?
Mark Scott.
Well, I think, it was interesting when, ChatGPT came out at the end of last year. I mean, in many educational centres, there was a sense of almost panic. What are we going to do about this? And it did take me back to the days when the pocket calculator emerged, and that had to be banned. That was going to destroy mathematics as we know it. And then the laptop should be banned. It was going to destroy education as we knew it. We've come to live and use those devices effectively. And I think we'll come to live and use ChatGPT very effectively and very well too, I think. It represents enormous challenges and ethical challenges. But one of the things we're thinking about at the university is how do we empower our students to effectively use these tools, because they're going to be using these tools for the rest of their career. And so I think we went in the first weeks after the new software was launched to have this kind of sense of panic and concern. But now there's a think, well, how are we going to use it? How are we going to use it in an assessment? How are we going to train students to effectively use it in the classroom? We had a group of students come and speak to our Senate, which is our governing board, and explaining to the Senate how students are using ChatGPT to help refine their learning, sharpen their learning, provide self-assessment to really prepare for assignments. And so it's a revolution, it's with us. Some jobs will go. I think the pattern of technological change, as far as the workforce is concerned, is that some jobs do go. A whole new series of jobs that we can't imagine are created. Whole new industries emerge. And the best thing you can do as a student is to try and understand this technology, to use this technology, to be able to interrogate this technology, and to be comfortable with it. So that you're not one of the jobs that goes, but you're someone who has a mastery of that environment and can effectively engage with that environment.
But there will be losers.
There will be losers, as there always has been losers in technological revolution. So what do? I think you try and get yourself in a position where you can have mastery and engagement and understanding of these tools, because if you have understanding of these tools, you're most likely to be in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that they present.
Okay, so Adam, how do we do that?
It was funny, wasn't it? Most parents first heard of ChatGPT when they got an email from their kid's school going, "Don't panic, we've banned ChatGPT." And as a parent, you went, "That's cool. Is that like some vaping thing or something? What's going on?" Then we all
parents Google ChatGPT.
Yeah. And there was a great example at the University of Sydney earlier this year. I think it was first year medical science, and the first assignment they were given, rather than they were going, "Okay, take ChatGPT, ask it a question to do with modern medicine or public health, and when you get the answer, ask the question back and improve the answer. Do that 4 times." Show us all the draft questions and the answers you got, and then take that final essay and mark it as though you were an examiner who had asked that question of a student. Now, what the person there is realising is, OK, these things, the way that you prompt them determines the answer you get. Better prompting can improve the answer. Mark it because they can make mistakes. It's really important that this technology is brought into education as early as possible, for a couple of reasons, and one being that if education doesn't get their head around it, if you guys don't get your head around it, and the students do, and they realise, well, this thing can pass the US Biology Olympiad at a 99% accurate rate, it can sit the US bar exam better than 90% of qualified law students trying to sit that exam. If education doesn't keep up, and we get even one generation of students who've got their way through high school and university handing in 85% mark essays that they haven't really thought about, but they've learned how to use just ChatGPT, a whole generation of critical thinking is lost. So you need to incorporate this technology in a way that still gets people to think what is true, what isn't, how do I improve upon, how do I use it as a tool, not just use it as a way to phone in and not have to engage in thinking and analysis myself. And it's a really delicate balance.
Oh, it sounds really hard. Angela, is it achievable? I mean, it sounds great the way he describes it, but is that achievable?
You know, I studied engineering at university, so I learned to code very young. And what you learn when you code is that you can only get out what you put in. And that's the thing about AI. I really don't like the phrase artificial intelligence because it implies that there is something going on there that is above and beyond something that we have given it. There really isn't. There can't be. All it can really do is what we give it. And even if it pretends or even if we imagine it to be something more sophisticated than that, it's not real intelligence, however you define intelligence, the way that we think. It can't be original in that same way. So I'll be honest here. I'll make a confession. I used ChatGPT for the first time a few months ago. I had to write a graduation address at a university for a university talk I was giving. And so I thought, I'll type it in, give me a graduation address in the style of Angela Saini, because there's enough of my work online that it could do that. And it sounded like me.
It plagiarised you.
It plagiarised me.
Strictly you plagiarised yourself.
That's true. That's true. I didn't use it. I have to promise you I didn't use it. But it just felt like a inferior version of what I would have done. It wasn't original. Anything new I could have come up with, it couldn't have come up with itself.
But we're still remarkably early in the technology. What blew everyone away? What got the attention? It went from Model 3.5 to 4. And the leap forward in that caught people by surprise. Like, feasible passing of an exam suddenly became top 1% of all people attending.
And this happened
exam.
incredibly quickly.
Yeah, now whether that's...
But that's because it's got all the answers.
But whether...
Of course it's going to answer the questions quickly when it has all the answers available to it. That would be true of any of us.
But yes, but whether this is plateaued now or whether you're going to see another few of those step jumps in breadth and speed, and if you look at some of the stuff that's happening in graphic applications and things like that, it's well beyond what people could do already. So I take your point, but try playing chess against my phone. And no human being who ever lives will beat the chess app, which is a minor function.
Right, but humans made the phone and they made the AI.
Yeah.
But AIs have taught themselves in 4 hours to be better than any human-designed chess playing
you've now made it sound terrifying. Thanks, Adam. Meganne, should we be terrified or can we get control of it? Which is really what you're calling for, Adam.
I don't think we should be terrified of it because it is a revolution, but our response to that should be an evolution. So it just means that we have to learn new ways of doing things. I mean, on a smaller scale, there was Wikipedia, right? Bringing Wikipedia into classes and a new way of critical thinking. So it's just an evolution that we have to go through.
Could robots do what you do?
Robots do what I do.
Okay. But not as well?
Well, if you think about it, so no human has yet gone to Mars. There are lots of robots on Mars. But imagine if there was a person there. So, and for example, a few months ago, there was this little rover on Mars and it had to stop all its activity for about a month because it got a rock stuck in its wheel. If there was a human there, they could fix that immediately. Also, if you're there with your own eyes, you can decide on what new science you should do while you're there. So humans can do it a lot quicker. And robots are absolutely necessary for that kind of exploration, but humans add something as well. So it's very much a synergy.
Well, we've got the perfect person next. I'd like to bring in Claire Fletcher. Hi, Claire.
Hi. So I study Mars and want to become a Mars astronaut. And my question to the panel this evening is, in studying that, I don't really see a path forward to continue doing that work here in Australia. Is the Australian space sector a sector that can actually compete globally, or are recent budget cuts that we've seen to that sector symptomatic of a sector that's never going to take off here? Pun intended, I guess. Yeah.
Good question. Megan?
I mean, it's tough. Unfortunately, space exploration costs a lot of money. And I was hugely disappointed to see the recent $1 billion cut for Earth observations as well. But at the same time, we do have a very strong background in technology and engineering here in Australia. And I think what the Australian Space Agency has done really well is that in its 5 years of lifetime, it has grown really, really quickly, and it's seen as a big player in the world. So what it has done is focused on the things that Australia is really good at, and it's building everything around that. And I think we don't now just have to rely on governments for funding, there's also industry funding. And we don't really want to see this as a competition with the rest of the world, because one of the best things about space exploration is that it's international. There's this cooperation. So as well as, yes, we have this really strong background in Australia, we have to add to that we can cooperate with the rest of the world as well.
Dr. Foley, are you disappointed to see that cut?
Well, Australia's got a lot of great critical technologies. And that's something where space is one of them, got quantum, AI, that sort of thing. And it's not for me to decide how the government spends its money.
But you
But
presumably don't
really
want to see less
important-
money towards science and technology.
Absolutely, we want as much as any government can afford to, because we know it makes a huge difference. But the thing that's really important to remember is that there's, it's not just one pool of money, there's a whole range of different investments, that there's a really burgeoning space industry that's igniting the passion of a lot of people, starting up businesses, and they're being globally competitive. They're part of, as Meganne said, was part of a global system. Space is something where it's not just one country doing it on its own. There's usually lots of cooperation. One of the things we've got to make sure we do is that when we decide on something, that we follow it through and really make it into something which is able to stand on its own 2 feet, be able to be an industry that employs people, that we're bringing the workforce in, and creates a lot of opportunities. Space is really important, from communications, being able to look at the Earth, being able to prepare for climate change and being able to monitor things. What we need to understand, though, is how it can make sure that it's something as a country that we're able to deliver on and afford, and as well as all the other things that make up modern living.
Mark, Scott, at the centre of that question, though, it seems to me, was about kind of a brain drain, right? Like people who feel like they need to leave our country to do... Yeah. That is a huge issue for us still, isn't it?
Yeah, we dramatically underinvest in research and development. You know, Australia, I think it's at 1.7% of GDP on research and development. The average in the OECD is 2.7%. ALP has a policy, I think they're working out whether they're going to reaffirm a policy to go to 3%. That would mean billions of extra dollars into research and development in Australia. And that's not just great for scientists who want to stay here and do terrific world-class research. That's fantastic for all Australians, because research and development drives enormous breakthroughs in science, but the applications of that improve the quality of life of all Australians, drives economic growth, drives productivity, makes the country wealthier and individual lives richer in the country. And so I think there is a question, and the challenge about that R&D investment is it's been ebbing away. Government putting less money into research at universities, industry putting significantly less money into R&D than you see in other countries around the world. And finally, the dollars aren't there. And if you think about the future of this country, our prosperity over the last century has been fundamentally driven by what we grow or what we dig up out of the ground. Our future is going to be based on the intelligence, the ingenuity, the creativity and the entrepreneurship of the people who work the land. And so there's a direct correlation between that investment and R&D investment. And at the moment we're undercooked, and that's a point of vulnerability.
Is there more work that universities like yours can do in teaming up with industry and doing more of this research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things about how university research is tracking is the very significant research we're now doing in partnership with other universities in Australia and around the world. We have research partnerships with hundreds of global universities and the great global universities, but more with industry as well. And we have partners with industry at the university now, research partnerships with Qantas, with GE, a range of companies are working with us more closely. I think one of the things actually we've got to crack is that you might have big companies investing in R&D, but the structure of the Australian economy is there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. So how do you create the opportunities where you can band their investment together, make it worthwhile for them to invest in R&D so we can all get the benefits of that?
The other thing you've got to crack is baggage tracking. But just quickly, it was a group of Aussie scientists at the CSIRO, John O'Sullivan and his team, invented Wi-Fi. They weren't aiming to invent Wi-Fi. They were aiming to look at radiation seeping out of black holes, and it was the mathematics designed to track that then pivoted into one of the great technological breakthroughs of all time. That's why you invest in blue sky, and in particular in an industry that's predominantly Northern Hemisphere dominated. In the Southern Hemisphere, to be the eyes of the other half of the sky, the other half of the time. Honeysuckle Creek was where the world first saw Neil Armstrong step down onto the face of it. It was that broadcast from Australia. We have a crucial role to play in that industry.
And basically just a lot of land available for certain launches. I mean, we have an excellent opportunity here in Australia.
Yeah, well, we were in Arnhem Land last week, and yeah, you just look at the history of the way that place is being used. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A Live with Meganne Christian, Mark Scott, Cathy Foley, Adam Spencer and Angela Saini. Now, before we get to our next question, we'd like to pay tribute to a friend of Q&A and a familiar face to many of you. Sadly, world-renowned epidemiologist Mary Louise McLaws passed away on the weekend following her battle with a brain tumour. Mary Louise is remembered for her very calm guidance during COVID. She also worked internationally on viruses including AIDS and SARS and swine flu. We extend our sympathies to her family and we remember her really fondly for being so available to us as well to explain a really difficult time for us all. Our next question is from Venkatesh Chenia Pan.
Hi. Is there any difference between men and women in power? Power, we all know power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts more, absolutely. Does it hold only for men or women too? Hope this doesn't put me on the wrong side of the discussion.
Okay, so is there a difference, Angela, between men and women when it comes to power?
I think we often imagine that there is. So this is something I write about a lot. And one of my previous books was on sex differences, gender differences and how we imagine them. And I have to say science historically has not done a wonderful job of distinguishing itself in how we think about sex difference even now. The entire establishment of modern European Western science was built on this assumption that women couldn't do the same intellectual work as men, which is why many universities and certainly all the scientific academies of Europe didn't admit women as members until sometimes well into the 20th century. So we have this very flawed research. But what we know from testing, and actually what we know from personal observation, is that there are very few statistical differences between how men and women think. The vast majority of the differences in how we think and how we behave are individual. They're from person to person. Now, if we're looking at power, sometimes I'm asked when I do events, women in the audience will say to me, wouldn't the world be better if it was just run by women, if all the men just took a break for a while and all the women took over? And the answer I often give is, which women do you mean? Do you mean Liz Truss or Margaret Thatcher? Or, we've had some pretty hard-headed women leaders and some pretty terrible women leaders as well. But what people are really thinking of is they're thinking of people like Jacinda Ardern. What they resort to is their stereotype of what they feel a woman leader should be, rather than acknowledging that every single one of us are different. We will all lead in our own way. What we really want in our leaders are qualities that make them brilliant and kind and empathic and caring and, strong at what they do, which can be found in anybody. Why do we not elect that kind of person generally? And that, a lot, I could go into much more detail about why
that
we structured
idea
things the way we are.
That there is something inherently different about men and women and how they lead. It's not based on science, right?
No, like I said, there have been very different kinds of women leaders, just like there are so many different kinds of male leaders around the world. And when we impose these stereotypes on how a leader should be, we become hostages to fortune then, because if they don't live up to that, if we just assume that every woman leads in the same way, if she fails, then we don't trust another woman to lead us again. So we have to be very, very careful before we resort to these kind of essentialist ideas about, what people can do based on their gender. Just let's elect good people and let's try and transcend this idea that it's your gender that defines everything about you.
Yeah, I want to get to the point where we're not discussing this, where we're not discussing differences between genders in any role, because anybody can do anything and they each have their own style. And yes, there are differences, but they're not stereotypical differences. Everybody has something to contribute to any kind of role.
But without... Sorry, can I ask? Without being facetious, when you see a comedian playing a room of 10,000 people and they play on certain tropes about the way that men and women in a relationship will communicate with each other or attempt to resolve a difference, everyone in the room's pissing themselves going, yeah, that's right. No one's going, I don't actually strictly think that's true. Have people looked, some people suggest there are different ways that men and women will approach an argument or admit they're wrong or be willing to see the other side or look for a rational, straight-line solution versus one that puts yourself in the other person's shoes. Are there any tendencies in sex differences in those sort of ways of behaving and interacting, which in some ways are at the heart of politics?
Well, if there are biological differences at work there, nobody's found them yet. But of course there are differences in how we behave gender-wise because we are raised in different ways.
Socialised,
You know,
yeah.
from a
From the day
very
we're
young
born.
age, we are taught to behave differently. The fact that we play out roles in relationships is a product of all of that socialisation and culturalisation over our entire lives.
Mark Scott, there are a lot of women in your executive team.
Yeah.
You are a man, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, big reveal, right?
Thanks, PK.
People come here
Yeah.
for those answers.
Yeah.
But why have you got so many women in your executive team?
Well, it's a meritocracy. And they got the
women have
jobs
more
because
merit.
they were the best people for the job. But I think it's kind of interesting, not an experiment, but I think people are watching carefully what's happening in Sydney. The majority of positions on our executive team are filled by women. The majority of deans of our big faculty are women. And I think there is an argument that the kind of organisation that we are trying to run now puts a great premium on collaboration and cooperation and working well in teams and being creating a collegial environment where we can problem solve together. I think a lot of university research now is all about being multidisciplinary. Can you bring disparate groups of people together and lead them in a way? And if in fact there was an old view in many organisations that leadership was all about just winning and cutting through and winning and being dominant in an environment, that paradigm is increasingly gone. And I think the women leaders we have, I think, are flourishing in that kind of environment and the demands of leadership in modern organisations. And I think, you know, we want to create at Sydney an environment where women academics know they can come to Sydney and their careers will flourish.
There are still more professors that are men at your university.
Yeah, we 58% of our staff are female. In all categories, there are more women in those leadership roles, apart from the most senior professoriate group. And we have a group that works with us called SAGE, and they are focusing particularly on gender equality in science. And we're trying to interrogate what is it in the culture that self-replicates so many men in those most senior professoriate roles compared to other roles. But we've got a lot of data. We're looking at questions of unconscious bias. We're looking at how you train people for interviews. We're kind of actively engaged in that kind of challenge because that's an unsatisfactory result, in my view. If 58% of your staff are female, but only 36% of the senior professors are female, you've got to ask what is there in our culture and the way we lead and in the way that we operate that's given rise to that, and how can we change that?
How have you viewed that? I reckon you might have a few views, Dr. Foley.
Well, look, I think we don't look after women when they're in the early stages of their career, and we do a really bad job of that. It's actually probably universally in science around the world, but Australia, I think, particularly does a bad job.
What do we do badly?
Too many short-term, insecure jobs. Universities don't do a good job at that in particular. And a lot of it has to do with the structural way of funding the research. So lots of small projects looking at metrics that are really pushing and driving a particular outcome. So that when women maybe take career breaks to have kids, they find it very difficult to get back into the system. And so when you're wondering why you don't have enough men in there, they don't have enough women in those roles, they've got to sort of make up a bit of time because they've been out of the workforce for...
They've got to live two lives. They've got to be two people.
Well, you saw the last census. Women do 14 hours of work in the house, where men do about less than 7. So we do twice the amount of work at home, and so therefore there's not as much time to be writing up your papers on the kitchen table on Sunday nights.
Or men work twice as efficiently, obviously, as the other are. Just joking. That was, tough crowd. Wow.
It's all right, you're wearing yellow. I'll forgive you.
Suck the air out of the room.
It is a big issue, is the way we design the way we do research. It's also, research is hard. I mean, it's quite often the hours are long and you have to work out how to support that. Childcare finishes at 6 o'clock at night. Most of us who've had kids have had to, pay quite a bit of overtime because waiting for that timer to go off so that you can pull a sample out of an oven doesn't mean that you can go and pick your child up on time, or you do and you sneak them back in when you shouldn't bring children into the lab.
Where in the pipeline? Where in the pipeline?
I want to hear about you sneaking your kids into the lab. Have you done that?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, actually, one of my kids has a liquid nitrogen burn on his head.
Yeah, there we go. Hello.
So good.
I just lost my job with CSIRO. I'll never go back there ever again.
He's okay now, though, isn't he?
He's 34 and 6 foot something or another, and he's very happy and he loves his mother still. So.
But that must have been tough for you in all seriousness.
Look, it wasn't easy when I had kids. So my kids are almost all in their 30s now, and there was no long daycare in the area when I was having children. So, you know, building a childcare centre was step one to be able to go back to work, and working with New South Wales, with the local council, CSIRO, we built a childcare centre. I was a treasurer for 7 years, and that's what you had to do if you wanted to be able to work.
You had to build your own childcare centres, women. Okay, next. Next we'll hear from Hazim Adli.
Hi. My friends and colleagues are seeing a gradual decline in Australia's STEM education at tertiary institutions. Many universities are relying on international students' inflated student fees and adopt various cost-cutting measures to stay afloat at the expense of teaching standards. I think this is unsustainable and will permanently harm Australian universities' reputations. Where do you see this going in the future, and what do you think needs to happen to remedy this?
I think we'll start with you, Mark Scott.
Yeah. Well, look, international students are a very important part of the landscape of Australian higher education, and we should welcome them. They have made a tremendous contribution to the teaching and learning environment and the research environment, and we have 80,000 graduates from the University of Sydney who live in China. And if in fact you think that China is going to be a major trading partner of Australia for the next century, that we want to keep a good relationship with China, then to have 80,000 ambassadors for us in China who had a great experience at the University of Sydney, who love the place, who are passionate alumni, that I think is a good thing for the nation. I think part of the challenge we've got is that the Australian higher education system, particularly our research level, has become dependent on the income that international students bring in a way that was never intended when the policy was first created. So in a sense, I don't think the challenge is international students. I think the challenge is that the rest of the system is not carrying its weight. That government investment in research has significantly declined over the last decade. Businesses' investment in research has significantly declined over the last decade. So there is less money to invest in teaching and learning facilities, in infrastructure, PhD scholarships, and a range of other things that you would want to have. I think, given the importance of higher education, there's a chronic underinvestment at the moment. And I think to point the finger at international students as the thing that's wrong with the system, the dependence on international students is but a symptom and a byproduct of the withdrawal of government and industry in paying their way.
But Hazim, you think that the quality of education has suffered as a result?
Yes, as a domestic student, I feel like there's a gradual decline in the quality of teaching I receive at universities.
Yeah, I think one of the real issues we face, I think, is the size of Australian universities. When I was a student at the University of Sydney, we had 20,000 students. Today we have 75,000 students. Now, Australian universities, particularly the research universities, do very well at a global level. We have 9 universities in the top 100 globally. That's unbelievable for a country our size. But what's really rare about those universities in global terms is how big they are. Harvard has 20,000 students. Monash has 90,000 students. And I think there is a challenge for us to try and create the kind of teaching and learning environment given the scale. And so we're doing a lot of work at Sydney on how you make campus more dynamic, how you make campus more engaging, and looking at what's happening in the classrooms. So I think it is a challenge for us, and I think there's a big review taking place to higher education at the moment, and I think one of the things is that it's a bit distorted, this business model, as it's emerged. Universities are very big, there's a great dependence on international students, and I think there's a question that says, is the student experience as much of a priority as we all feel that it needs to be?
I think that size also puts a lot of pressure on the lecturers and professors and so on, because on the one hand, they're trying to build their research career, they're trying to get funding for projects with a decrease in funding, and at the same time, they're trying to teach students. And usually they'll have a preference for teaching or research, but they have to do both. And a lot of them prefer research, and so in that case, the teaching tends to decline a bit. So I don't know, we need to find a balance somehow.
Yeah, and one of the things we want to do at Sydney, and we're going to do, is recruit more specialist teachers, people who are academics who really prioritise teaching, who are outstanding in teaching, and bring them in so that they can fully focus on that as a craft.
Okay, next we want to hear from Adam Kuziak.
We would like to ask, considering recent commercial ventures, who owns science? The rich, poor, past or future generations, the developers, or those who fund it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Angela, who owns science?
This is a question that has actually been the title of a lecture that I've given before.
What was the answer?
I do think about this because, like I said, research has been dominated by this European Western model of modern science. That's what we talk about when we talk about modern science. That's what we mean. And over time, it has become completely enmeshed with the needs of the state, the needs of corporations. The values of science are now completely geared towards productivity. How can we make, how can we get the most out of this rather than asking, rather than focusing on the simple question. So just earlier, we were talking about the space program, and the way that it has been framed is we should invest in space research because that will give us economic benefits in the long term. Why can't you just invest in space anyway without having to worry about the long-term economic benefits just for the sake of understanding the world? And sometimes these things can happen by accident. Years ago, I was writing about India's space program. Now, India has had a space program since the 1960s. And at that time, it was a very impoverished country. There were high rates of illiteracy. The rest of the world was so judgmental about this. They all said, why would India waste its money on this when it has so many other social problems going on? If it hadn't done that, number one, it wouldn't have created this generation of wonderful space scientists who are doing incredible work now. But later, that gave rise to the tech industry. The tech industry in India, which is enormous, relied on all that work that was done before. We have a responsibility to not just think about the economics in the short term, but just remember that everything we learn about the world and the universe and about us is useful in some way. It will always bear fruit in some way. And the values behind that are what we need to think about. That this focus, this relentless concern about money and productivity and how can we, just push this envelope about making things faster and better should sometimes take second place to how can we just be better humans? How can we create a science that is just about understanding the world better and being better people?
Dr. Foley, I heard in your National Press Club address, that you've got your own story of actually coming up with technology which was incredible that ended up being commercialised, but you weren't the beneficiary of that. Can you just walk us through that story? Because I think it's incredible.
Oh, well, as a PhD student, I did work on indium nitride, which is, I'm sure all of you know what it is. It's a material that's actually part of all white light-emitting diodes. This was back in the early 80s, and so this was at a time where it was a very new and novel material. I measured it, showed that it was got particular properties that are useful, and then I got a job at CSIRO, published papers, and then people around the world read those papers and got lots of citations, good for my track record. But the thing was that it was picked up by Japanese scientists, and then they added in gallium nitride and were able to make a material that could be used in diodes. And, well, white light emitting diodes are energy efficient. They're lighting up probably what we're in today. And I got some good papers out of it. So it was just not on my agenda at that stage.
No, but other people have made money out of your idea.
Yes, but it's not just no one piece of work actually leads to the outcome. It's a body of a whole lot of things. So science is one thing, but to turn it into something, you've got to add a whole lot of other things with it. So science on its own is good information, really important. We understand the world around us, but we have to engineer it. You've got to have a business model to make it work. You've got to have the design and so that people want to use it and so on. And it's when that all comes together, that's when you end up taking knowledge, ideas into something that is leading to prosperity or economic opportunity. So science is just the one little bit of it.
Yeah, I never spent days in the lab because I thought I was going to get rich from it. That's not what your priority as a researcher.
That's true. But can I add one other
But would it be so bad if you could?
Well, I mean, obviously not.
Well, it depends on what motivates you. I can assure you most scientists don't become scientists initially because they want to be rich, although we're beginning to see some of our young people actually spinning out companies and being hugely successful. And this is pretty exciting. So instead of people thinking they've got to get a job with Mark at Sydney University, what they are doing is building their own job. And that's, just a whole new way of thinking about things.
And we can bring you the result of our online poll now. We asked you, should Australia get a public holiday for a potential Matildas win in the World Cup? Wow. More than 14,000 of you responded. Here's how you voted. 53% said yes, 41% said no, 6% are unsure. Now, to finish tonight's discussion, here's Gareth King.
David Sinclair proposes that aging is a disease and that disease is treatable. If his theory is true, what implications do you think this has for society and science at whole?
Adam.
I think the theory needs a fair bit more work from my limited understanding of it. I don't know if there's many people suggesting people will live substantially longer than the longest we're seeing people, as much as perhaps there's a chance to live a lot healthier for the period of time that we are here. I know individually I don't have any great desire to live to be 200 or 250 or anything like that, especially if it meant that everyone who I ever cared about, I'd watch them die. But if I could live to an age and only about 2 weeks before that age go, I don't feel great now, I might just go off and die, I would prefer that quality of healthy life over the actual end point of whatever that number was. The one little sidebar, there is a part of me that would love to live just for a week 200 years from now, just to know what it is that we know.
Yeah.
Kids in Year 8 today are told stuff that the brightest minds who ever lived before 1930 never knew. What it is that is just commonplace in the year 2300 blows my mind, but I don't necessarily want to live every day until then to find out.
No. Mark Scott, you want to live forever?
Certainly not. Once is enough, I think. But I think some of our most exciting science is around, and researchers are working on helping people live long lives and great lives. I was talking with some scientists the other day, the work they are doing to help people with the diseases that often inflict the elderly, glaucoma, macular degeneration, and our ability within our lifetime to be able to stop those diseases, arrest those diseases, well, that would be truly transformational. There's research that says for many people, one of their greatest fears is going blind, losing their sight. It's kind of unimaginable, the loss of agency in life that brings, that we could do that so you could live a long life and a great life. I think that's miraculous, and that's what our scientists are working on right now.
Meganne?
Well, as an astronaut, I'm sacrificing myself for your long life because some of the research that happens on the International Space Station is actually into aging, because astronauts age a lot more quickly under those microgravity conditions.
Does that worry you?
Not really. I mean, there's a certain level of risk that you have to accept, and I'm just excited about going to space. So I think those studies are really important. I think they're really interesting. I think they will help us in a way that no other kind of research can do. The microgravity environment is really fascinating. But I think going back to what you were saying before, I think yes, it would be nice to live longer, but as long as everybody was living longer. So if we can do that in a way where all our family and friends are also living longer, then yeah.
You've actually lived in Antarctica, very isolated, so you have some idea what it's like to be without all your people.
Yeah, I spent a year in Antarctica, did a winter over there. I was isolated for 9 months of that time, and had, thanks to technology, good communication, so I could send plenty of WhatsApp messages, but it's not quite the same as actually being with those family and friends. So, I would definitely hope that if I can live longer, then everybody else around me can too.
Dr. Foley?
Well, it's really amazing to think that the humans are designed to live for 37 years if you look at some work that's been done on vertebrates. And so our health and medical outcomes is just mind-boggling. The fact that we're all here today is because of science and health and medical research. Pushing those boundaries is what humans are good at doing. Science is our superpower. It's actually allowing us to be who we are, building the stuff we have around us. It all comes out of the earth. It all comes out of our ability to manipulate things. So I never know what the future's going to hold. I never say never when it comes to science because the human mind is so amazing. I'm not worried about ChatGPT because the creativity, the curiosity we have is actually going to lead us where we need to be.
Angela.
Of course, there is so much value in this kind of research, but we have to remember that this idea of living forever is being driven very largely by these Silicon Valley billionaires who are pumping huge amounts of money for selfish reasons because they want to be able to enjoy their billions for as long as possible. It's not designed for the rest of us. They're not doing this for everyone. They're doing it for themselves. So, just going back to what I was saying earlier about the values of science, we have technologies available to us right now that would allow millions of people to live longer, children to survive diseases, preventable diseases, which we could also be pumping money into. Those billionaires could also be investing in. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do the research. Of course we should do it. But if we care about human life, then also that human life matters too.
And that's all we have time for. Thank you so much to this excellent panel. Meganne, Christian, Mark Scott, Cathy Foley, Adam Spencer and Angela Saini. And thank you for sharing your stories and questions. Next week, I'll be with you live from Melbourne. Singer and songwriter Tina Arena will be here to perform for us. And joining the panel, the Minister for Employment and the Arts, Tony Burke, Nationals MP, and apparently he's a musician too, Sam Birrell. We'll find out a bit more about that. Author, disability advocate and actress Hannah Divany and artist and filmmaker George Gittos. Head to the website to register to be in the audience. Good night.